Welcome to another live episode of The Breakdown. It is Sunday, September 24th, 2023. I'm your host, Nate Pike. We have so much to talk about tonight. I can't even with the last week. I imagine I'm not the only one, but we're going to try to get through as much as we possibly can before we open it up to our open mic, which we absolutely will once we get through I don't even know what to call it. Once we get through all the things, because there's a lot of things that we definitely need to get through tonight. But we're going to start with the fast stuff, the stuff we can move through quickly, nimbly, if you will. Because there have been some light, but still noteworthy developments, not the least of which, as we get right into it, is the announcement from Alberta Green Party leader Jordan Wilkie. He's stepping down, moved to BC. Because everybody is these days. It seems like the need for people to get the heck out of the province just keeps growing. Jordan Wilkie, of course, led the Alberta Greens in the last provincial election, got them to one of the highest finishes they've ever had, and now he's going to go work for the Greens in BC. I mean, you're hard pressed to find anything bad to say about Jordan, except that it's just unfair that a man that handsome is also a firefighter and he's leaving the province. Sorry, ladies, he is already married, though, with kids. Delightful family, I'm told. So that's what we're going to start with. So best of luck, best of wishes to the Alberta Greens. That's another party that's going to be having a leadership race. So far, confirmed, the Alberta Party, although the date and time and specificness hasn't been announced. Mind you, the Alberta Party has been kind of quiet this month. They haven't really said anything since the beginning of the month, which is super strange because, there's been some pretty major developments, cough, pension plan, cough, nationwide, hate protest, cough, lots of things the Alberta Party historically would have weighed in onto, but apparently they're not wading into anything. They're just staying on the beach, the shore, for the time being. Do with that what you will. But the Alberta Party, we had Barry Morshida on the show. He confirmed he's going to be stepping down as leader. The Green Party now, the Liberals, I believe, although we're going to get some clarification on that in an upcoming episode right quick here. They had a leadership race that nobody showed up for, and their interim leader got promoted to the permanent leader, regular leader. Whether or not that's going to remain, we're going to find out, hopefully, in just a short little bit of time here. And then, of course, the elephant in the room, the big one everybody's waiting for. It's like the worst kept secret in Alberta politics that at some point in the next 2 years, 3 years, the Alberta NDP are likely going to be having a little bit of a leadership race. There's all kinds of rumors and questions about the start date. Some people are saying October, some people are saying January, but the one thing is that everybody's saying is that it is going to come. So it's very possible, depending on how Danielle Smith does with her party and a leadership review that may or may not be down the road, it's very possible we could be heading into the next election with entirely new commodities, which would be a fascinating place to be in the province of Alberta. But anyways, best of luck to Jordan. Now we get into it. Adriana LaGrange, the Minister of Health, still doesn't feel right to say that. She had a busy little week. She announced some things. One of the things that she announced, she put out a tweet saying it was great to meet with the Chiropractic Association of Alberta. And then there's double spaces for reasons, to discuss the role of chiropractics within Alberta's primary care system. I look forward to our future discussions. I'm just going to, one sec. Let's bring that up. Let's start moving this sucker forward because it's going to be a night. Chiropractors aren't doctors. There, I said it. We'll start hot and we'll work our way from there. So the reality is the practice of chiropractic, new word, chiropractic is fictional mostly. There's some arguments to be made that for chiropractors, there's some benefits if somebody's experiencing lower back pain. But let's just turn to our handy dandy Wikipedia page and see what it says about chiropractic. practice. A chiropractor may have a Doctor of Chiropractic, DC degree, and be referred to as, and they're literally quote, putting it in quotes, doctor, but is not a doctor of medicine, MD, or a doctor of osteopathic medicine, DO. While many chiropractors view themselves as primary care providers, chiropractic clinical training does not meet the requirements for that designation. Systematic reviews of controlled clinical studies of treatments used by chiropractors found no evidence that chiropractic manipulation is effective, with the possible exception of treatment for back pain. A 2011 critical evaluation of 45 systemic reviews concluded that the data included in the study failed to demonstrate convincingly that spinal manipulation is an effective intervention for any condition. And that's not even going into the whole history of chiropractic. That's going to be my new word. I'm going to write that down somewhere. Because when you actually start to go down the rabbit hole of how chiropractic came to be a thing, it's pretty wild, man. It's right up there with like the origin story for Scientology, and I'm not even joking. Go read it for yourselves. Don't believe me. But it's pretty wild. Given that this is one of the things that Danielle Smith campaigned on during her leadership race. She was going to bring in all the woo science. Everybody gets a free amethyst. I don't know. And now we're starting to see movements to integrate people who identify as doctors into the primary care network. Because all of the evidence that is available says, you know what, at best, they're basically doing the same work as a massage therapist. At worst, they're actually causing real harm and sometimes death. So that's a fascinating choice by the new health minister. Wonder where she's getting those marching orders from. Not really. It's pretty clear where she's getting those marching orders from. But here's one of the big pieces of news that we got to talk about, because we said just a couple weeks ago, hey, that social studies curriculum, man, nobody knows what's going on there. Somebody should probably find out what the deal is, because there's questions and stuff. Well, it turns out there's going to be some consultation that goes on. Dimitris Nicolaides, Minister of Education, announced Alberta's government is beginning a transparent and collaborative engagement process with Albertans and education partners to redraft the K-6 social studies curriculum. And then a bunch of words about how they're going to actually do some consultation. Now, where this gets to be really important, where this gets to be really relevant for Albertans, is the fact that we've seen what happens looking at the previous social studies curriculum and some of the other curriculum. We've seen what happens when there isn't that engagement. So if, and I'm just saying maybe, let's be optimistic for a second here. If this is a sincere offer, if Dimitris Nicolaides is sincere about getting actual consultation on the social studies curriculum, when those opportunities start to become available, it's going to be critically important that anyone who cares about the future of social studies education in the province of Alberta shows up and makes their voices heard. Because based on what we saw this week, and yep, we're going to be getting into that in a bit, there are going to be other voices that are maybe not so interested in evidence-based or actual history or anything like that, who will be showing up. So it's up to Albertans who do want to see a quality curriculum show up and make their voices heard. It's like we talked about it last week, and then all of a sudden, bam, it happens. It's crazy. Moving on from there, we got to talk about the War Room. As if it wasn't bad enough that the Alberta War Room decided at a point in time that they were going to go to war with animated Bigfoot. I wish I was joking. But again, we have to remember that this is the same organization that stole their logo not once, not twice, but allegedly 3 times. They kind of tweaked it to get away with the third one. During their launch, the War Room has had no shortage of scandal. They seem to just want to stay in the news for all the wrong reasons, because a story broke this week how the Alberta War Room was actually putting money towards influencing municipal elections, not just municipal elections, but municipal elections in other provinces. They were putting money towards a letter writing campaign that happened during the municipal elections in Nanaimo. Now, it's important to remember the whole reason that the war room became, well, the whole reason that the war room was justified in the first place, not just because it's a really convenient way to dump millions of dollars into pet programs that nobody can ever actually find out about what's going on because you can't FOIP it because they built it that way because transparency or something. The whole reason that the war room was initiated was because, Alberta, we're the greatest in the history of great, and people keep trying to mess with us. We have all these other provinces, all these other countries. Can you even imagine? They're trying to mess with our economy. They're trying to mess with our democracy. They're trying to influence how our elections go. How horrifying is that? We must fight back. It was part of Jason Kenney's fight back strategy. The whole idea of having a war room to out the outside influences that were trying to mess with our economy and our democracy. And what's that? Oh, look, that's exactly what the war room's doing. It's becoming increasingly clear. Not only are the folks who are running the war room grossly incompetent, they're definitely not interested or equipped enough to put Alberta's best foot forward to the world. Because if there is anything that the war room has accomplished, it's going back on their founding principles, or at least their stated founding principles, and embarrassing the province and the country over and over and over again. Moving on from there. Another little story that fell through the cracks in a lot of ways, but it's kind of important. There's a company called Tallahassee Explorations. And on September 15th, 2023, the AER issued a reasonable care and measures order to Tallahassee Exploration, Inc., as the company has repeatedly failed to comply with regulatory requirements and address compliance issues in a timely manner. And what they put in the order is really quite telling, especially when you take into consideration that we're in like month 2, 1.5 of Danielle Smith's moratorium on renewable energy. So just as a reminder, as we go through this story, Danielle Smith made the rules. Hey, you know what? We're going to put a moratorium on renewable energy. Then she tried to blame a bunch of people. Didn't stick with any of them. Nobody really knows what the impetus for this was other than Smith and maybe Rob Anderson. But that's speculation. But no power plants over 1 megawatt are allowed to be approved for 7 months while people figure out how are we going to deal with the environmental impacts of green energy. Also, some people don't like how it looks. But let's go through the Tallahassee order. The AER's order requires Tallahassee to take several actions, which include submitting a plan outlining all actions it will take to properly manage its sites, address outstanding compliance issues, ensure ability to respond to an incident or emergency, and perform remedial work related to previous incidents. Submitting an abandonment plan with specific actions and timelines for all overdue mineral lease expired wells within 6 months from the date of this order. Complete delineation for historical spills and submit a plan for remedial action relating to those incidents. And provide written updates every 2 weeks to the AR with details on the progress of the work required under the order. It's the last one that's really quite telling. Complete delineation for historical spills. So there have been spills under Tallahassee Energy's watch, and a plan for remedial action related to those incidents. So not only have there been spills, but there's been spills that still need work to be done. Now, there's some people who like to say, spill, that's just when you get an unexpected amount of the resource. You know what they call a spill of wind in southern Alberta? Well, they call it a day that ends in Y. It's very windy there. But that's the difference. That's the fundamental difference. If there's too much of the resource of wind or solar, it's a nice day or it's a windy day. Moving on from there. Next up, you thought that the mountains were safe. There was a whole thing. We had an election, and there were people talking about the mountains. And you know what? We managed to chase away those Benga mining folks. Except no, we didn't. They're back. They've changed their name. It's Benga's. It seems like they're kind of like the guy at the club who the bouncer says, no, you can't come in. And then they go back and quickly chalk on a mustache and then try to get back to the door, but they haven't really fooled anyone. They've come back with the same proposal for the same things that they wanted to do. Reading from the CBC story, back when it was called Benga Mining, the company applied for developmental permissions on Grassy Mountain. Federal and provincial entities responded with a two-part refusal. In June 2021, the AAR said the open pit coal project wasn't in the public interest. Then a federal review of the proposition found that it was likely to cause unjustified, severe environmental damage. So we're not just talking about a little bit of the environmental, we're talking about severe environmental damage on water quality, a threatened species of trout, and endangered a variety of pine trees. Well, as we talked about at the beginning of the week, they're back. Here's their application, and on their application, it even makes it very, very clear that they are formally known as, they're now called Northback Holdings Corporation, operating out of Blairmore, but they're now going under the name Northback, which is a trick that we've seen over and over and over again when it comes to mineral and resource extraction. If somebody gets into a little bit of trouble, then they go, we'll just create a new company and we'll try it again. You'd think of all of the things that could be addressed, all of the loopholes that could be closed, all of the environmental issues that the provincial government could choose to put some energy, time, resources into. Closing loopholes like chalking a mustache on might be one of those things that they choose to address. But here we are, and the whole conversation about the mining in the mountains is right back on the table. Now, it's also important to remember when we're talking about this, that this was an issue that Danielle Smith, again, during her leadership race, she was really quite fond of. She did a whole speaking gig down in Blairmore where she talked about, hey, you know what, maybe the coal mining, the miners seem to want the coal mines. Maybe we should listen to those folks instead of all of the environmental experts and all of the people whose water would be affected and all of the ranchers and everything else. There's like 30 people that were at a meeting. They seem serious. Moving on from there, the big show, second big show, third big show. Like I said, it was a busy week. Got to talk about the World Petroleum Congress, hosted in Calgary, Alberta, from September 17th to the 21st. A lot of people thought it was going to be a really big deal. A lot of people thought there was going to be protests related to the WPC. It turns out it was nothing but a warm welcome, even when some people entered the room a little bit on the hot side. The Saudis came in. They came to Calgary, warning of the consequences of ditching oil. You don't want to ditch oil. You don't want to do that. You never know what could happen. It's not like Saudi Arabia has a record for unconventional means of getting what they want, let's say. But what was really fascinating was how quickly Danielle Smith embraced the Saudis. She even made a point of greeting them, apparently, at the airport, where she put a tweet. I was delighted to welcome His Royal Highness Prince Abdulaziz bin Salman Al Saud to Calgary, Alberta this morning for the World Petroleum Congress. She went there to meet him at the plane. Now, that's good Albertan hospitality, but it raises some questions. Because one of the things that Danielle Smith and the United Conservative Party for quite some time have been banging on about is the whole idea of ethical oil. Danielle Smith has tweeted about it twice in the last 18 months. It's certainly been a talking point in many speeches. Certainly has been a talking point in the UCP leadership debates. Certainly was a talking point in the last provincial election. Oh, Alberta with our ethical oil. We're so ethical. And the argument for ethical oil actually comes from, in a completely not surprising turn of events, a book that was written by Danielle Smith's bestie. It just gets so tiring so quickly. Ezra Levant. Ezra Levant wrote the book back in 2010, Ethical oil, the case for Canada's oil sounds. And the whole thing was predicated on the argument that, well, you know what? We treat our workers really well and we don't tend to behead people, letting women drive and everything. And there were a lot of direct comparisons and indirect comparisons between Alberta's record on human rights and countries like Saudi Arabia's record on human rights. Danielle Smith, she's been using the ethical oil argument. And in fact, just to put the cherry on top, after Danielle Smith made a point of apparently going to the airport to meet the prince, how did she wrap up her experience with the World Petroleum Congress? Well, she put out a tweet. The World Petroleum Congress has concluded and was a smashing success. Alberta was honored to host delegates from around the world, and we will continue to provide ethical energy to the world responsibly. So it's almost as if the ethical oil argument is nothing more than a convenient argument to make us feel better about ourselves. When you actually take a look at Alberta's track record when it comes to resource development, we're not the greatest. We're just not. When you take a look at the fact that the government of Canada and Alberta, in many ways, demonized the Wet'suwet'en folks who were just trying to defend their land that technically belongs to them. We're talking about the fact there's been no informed conversations in the province of Alberta about what unceded territories are at the higher levels of government. You've never seen Danielle Smith talk about unceded territories. She just talks about how she was told at the dinner table one time that she might have some First Nations Cherokee going on. And also, our First Nations are just the best. We don't hear the conversations about the uglier parts of how Alberta got to resource development. And to be clear, there are obviously countries in the world that are way worse than Alberta's track record. But when you have the premier, multiple premiers, because Jason Kenney did it too, and when you have the right media, I guess, I still haven't landed on what to call them. I liked creative writers. I think we used that last week. When we have the right creative writers involved in media constantly banging the drum on the ethical oil, and we have to stand up to the evils of Russia. We have to stand up to the evils of Saudi Arabia. But as soon as the plane touches down, there's Danielle Smith ready with a big shit-eating grin on her face to say, "Hey, welcome to Alberta. So happy you're here." It's almost as if that's directly correlated to who holds a significant amount of shares in Alberta's, particularly oil sands development. But that would just be a crazy coincidence, I'm sure. Moving on from there. Definitely need a drink for this part. We need to talk about what happened on Wednesday, because it turned out to be a much bigger event than what anyone was anticipating in regards to the World Petroleum Congress. And what we're talking about is the Million March for Children. Now, the original plan, as advertised, was that there were going to be 1 million Canadians who showed up to say, "Hey, we won't stand for this woke progress stuff no more." And it's really important to highlight in that most of the country, the counter protesters, the people who showed up to say, "Yeah, we'd really like it not to be 1952 anymore," outnumbered the protesters, the people who were there for the Million March for Children. But it wasn't that way in Calgary. And there have been a lot of people who have asked a lot of questions. And one of the things that keeps coming up is, what were these things about? And the truth is, it's about a lot of different things. So as we talked about on the show before, one of the things that COVID-19 unfortunately gave people the opportunity to do, the fringe, as they sometimes like to call themselves. I'm not sure if they're doing it satirically or not. But the more extreme views, the conspiracy theorists, what it gave them the opportunity to do was organize and get to know each other And social media gave them a network by which they could all get connected and all kind of team up and overlook each other's bullshit so that they could push ahead on whatever it was that the issue was. Now, obviously, for COVID-19, for most people, it was vaccinations. It was vaccination passports. That's where the conspiracy theorists spent a lot of their time. But they also went down the WEF rabbit hole. They also went down the 5G microchip and the vaccines rabbit hole. So we're talking about an incredibly diffuse group of people who just feel like they've been wronged. And ever since COVID-19, they've been looking for what's the next thing that I can get pissed off over? What's the next thing? How am I going to be able to justify my Sunday or my Wednesday freedom walks when I don't have a group of 60 people to come with me? And unfortunately, one of the things that they've latched onto is something that is straight up imported from the United States with regards to supportive care for trans kids. And there's a lot of bullshit that is going on in this conversation. But that's the highest level that it's hedged under. If you talk to the leaders and you put a camera on them, they'll tell you, you know what this is about? This is about, we don't want our kids being turned trans. We don't want our kids being turned into something that we don't want them to be. And there's a fundamental core of this argument that hasn't been particularly well addressed. And that fundamental core is, do you believe, do you accept the science, the evidence, everything else that exists that says there's more than just this binary state of being for gender and sexuality? Which is not to say that there's not people out there who are super binary. As I pointed out many times on the show, I'm about as cis, straight, white, male, middle-aged peak privilege as you can possibly get. But I don't begrudge anybody who's not. And I accept that the science supports that there's a lot more than just my particular flavor of vanilla that's out there. And that's a really important piece to understand, because either you accept that people exist on a spectrum or you don't. And this is where the crux of it all really starts to lie. Because the reality is, as much as the people who are organizing these protests are hedging it, and as we'll see, even that hedging is by and large absolutely bullshit. They're hedging it under the argument, we don't want our kids being turned trans or being influenced. The fundamental question that I have for these people is, if you believe, to these organizers, if you believe that somebody can be turned trans or turned gay, or they can make a choice to whatever, what would it take to make you enjoy? If we've got one of the organizers, most of the organizers are men. I wonder what it would take to convince one of those men to enjoy intimate relations with another man. And I bet you if you asked them, they'd say, there's absolutely nothing that could make me do that. I would never choose to do that. And the truth is, that's either the truth for them. They could also be horribly repressed, who knows? But you can't force someone to change who they're attracted to. That's why conversion therapy fails. That's why this whole conversation isn't about choices. What we're talking about when we're talking about acknowledging the existence, which isn't a big ask, of anybody who's not binary, cis, is that you're just acknowledging that these people exist and that it's not a choice. They are who they are, which shouldn't be a big ask. But as we saw this week across the country, and particularly in Calgary, there are some people who don't believe that. And what's most horrifying is that they're teaching their kids that. There is no universe where this kid wakes up and decides, you know what I want to do today? Because I want to. Because I'm 7 or 8. I want to make a sign of my own volition that says, kick the gays out of the country. And there's no universe where a kid that young puts that sign in a vehicle and drives themselves down to the protest. This is something that had to have parental involvement, period. And that in and of itself should be enough to make the case that there needs to be better education so that kids don't get put in positions where they're saying, holding up signs that say, kick the gays out of the country, or worse, saying things like this.
Listen to them, they tell us what they want to be, not whatever those guys accuse us of. What do you like to say?
I like to say that the gays are psychopaths and we're not psychopaths.
No, that's not true.
One more thing to say.
No, that's not good.
The gays, they are disgusting.
What's that mean?
Now you can hear the voice of the one woman in the background who's saying, no, that's not good. And that's good. I question why she's there. But at least one person in that crowd recognized that what that kid was saying was completely inaccurate and completely hateful. But that's the same kid who was holding up this sign. That's the same kid whose parents very clearly took him down there. Now, for obvious reasons, we're not showing this kid's face because this kid is obviously, I want to use the word, a victim of shitty parenting, of indoctrination. You want to talk about indoctrination? That's what the face of indoctrination is. That's the behavior that is indoctrination. But of course, that kid wasn't the only speaker there. Leader of Take Back Alberta. I hate that we have to talk about this guy as much as we do. We're not going to play David Parker's full speech because it's like 5.5 minutes long, and so much of it you've already heard before. But there are a few clips that we pieced together. So to be clear, this isn't the full speech. If you want to watch the full speech, you can go to any of our social media. It's horrifying. The amount of anger and hate in this man's voice is absolutely off the charts. And one of the things that I want to be clear of, if you're looking at the video or if you're hearing when he's talking about them, he's pointing across the street at the counter-protesters. The counter-protesters who showed up to say, you know what, kids deserve to feel safe even when they have garbage parents.
I'm going to let their accusations of hate scare you. No! Are we going to take back this province? Yeah! Let me tell you something. The Muslims are with us. Yeah! The Sikhs are with us. Yeah! The Christians are cowards. That toxic ideology is consuming our society. Yeah! They have taken over our justice system. They have taken over our education system. They have taken over our healthcare system. And I tell them this, we are coming and we will not stop until all of you are unelected. Yeah! We will destroy the unions. Yeah! We will destroy this horrible, hateful ideology that is castrating our children. We will drive this toxic ideology out of our schools if we have to fire every principal in the province to do it. Yeah! We will drive them out of our school administrations. We will drive them out of our bureaucracy. This is my message to you. Do not listen to the mainstream media. Alright? Do not believe them when they say that you are a small fringe minority with unacceptable views. They are the small fringe minority with unacceptable views. And I tell you this, we will defeat you.
So when he says we will defeat you, when he says they are the small fringe minority, for those of you who are listening to the audio version or you're on the Twitter Spaces right now, he's pointing directly at the counter-protesters. Now that's the whole thing is hard to listen to because It's a reality of what's happening in our province right now. And it's hard for me as a middle-aged, straight white guy to listen to. So I can only imagine how hard it would be for somebody who's not a straight, cisgendered white guy to hear that. I can only imagine how hard it would be to be a 12 or a 13-year-old kid and see that kind of hate and rhetoric directed at you. There's a lot of hypocrisy in what Mr. Parker had to say there. He opened with, "Don't let anyone tell you that your views are hateful," and then proceeds to point across the street to the people who are trying to make safe places for kids and calls them hateful. He calls the ideology that would see those kids protected hateful. It's fascinating how a man who says, "Don't let anyone ever call you hateful," really is comfortable throwing around the word hate at everybody who disagrees with him. He's playing straight out of a playbook. Don't believe the mainstream media. There's a checklist out there. You can go and look it up. What are the warning signs of a certain type of government? Mr. Parker manages to hit just about all of them. He talks about how healthcare has been infiltrated. As somebody who works in the healthcare system, that's just about the dumbest thing that I think I've ever heard. He talks about how the education system has been infiltrated. As somebody who has parents in the public education system, I can tell you, if anything, especially in elementary school, with the shift in curriculum, teachers are absolutely overwhelmed. Because of the way that the new curriculum is structured, kids are being expected to learn things that they haven't been taught yet and weren't supposed to be taught for another year. But because of the curriculum shift, that stuff got moved to the year before, and they're just in this nebulous limbo of sucks to be you, this is going to hurt. There's no teacher who has the kind of time that's required to change somebody's mind in the way that I talked about earlier. And again, I would love to not be talking about David Parker. I would love to let him just fall into irrelevance and obscurity. But the reality of David Parker is he knows people. David Parker, for anybody who hasn't been listening, if this is your first time listening to the show, welcome. You picked a hell of a one to join us on. David Parker is the person who takes credit for getting rid of Jason Kenney as leader of the UCP. David Parker is the person who takes credit for Danielle Smith being installed as the new leader of the UCP. And if you think that those sorts of claims are unfounded, you only have to talk to the people on the inside of those things, and they'll say, yeah, no, dude knows how to mobilize people. He knows how to get people angry, as you saw from that speech. Now, that's a very different David Parker than the one that we saw on Jesperson, but it's the same guy. He's just unrestrained because he's got an audience that he knows digs what he's saying. He's not trying to convince anyone there. He's trying to fire people up. This is the same David Parker who had Danielle Smith in March of this year, I think it was March, earlier this year, attend his wedding. This is not a random guy standing on a street corner preaching hate. This is a guy standing on a street corner preaching hate who is connected to some very, very powerful people. And we have already seen in this province that Danielle Smith is afraid of people like David Parker. Because when she first got to office, she called the justice minister at the time and tried to get him to make the charges against Artur Pawlowski go away because she was afraid of what the backlash could look like. That's the reality of who David Parker is. And he can't just be dismissed. But he's also, it's worth noting, not the credited organizer of the event. That person is Mahmoud Moura. And Mahmoud likes to say, you know what? I'm just trying to protect the kids. I got nothing against the gays. I think they're great. I just want them to leave me and my kids alone. That's all I'm after. Except that's not exactly true. Because Mr. Moura, at least looking at his multiple Facebook accounts, I've never seen anyone have like 3 or 4 Facebook accounts and then tag themselves in their posts so that they appear on their multiple timelines. It's kind of wild going through this dude's social media, but a lot of that has to do with the content. As we've highlighted before, Mr. Moura very clearly has some anti-Semitic views. We shared this picture before. The freedom of social media, Mr. Moura titles. And then you see a hand of Facebook covering a person's mouth, and then a hand of Instagram covering a person's mouth, and then a hand with the Star of David choking them. No stranger to conspiracy theories. Mr. Moura posted, and this is the caption again, similar situation, media control people's minds. And then it's a graphic of the World Trade Centers after the 2 planes that hit, and a picture of a kid in a mask. And the caption of the photo is, people who believe 2 planes caused these to collapse now look like this. But of course, Mr. Moore's got some strong views, it appears, on vaccination as well, the most effective weapon. And then he's got a graphic that shows the weapons of war, the evolution of war. And it starts with a rock and a spear and an arrow and a bullet and a missile and then a syringe. It's also worth noting, Mr. Moura was very active in the freedom folks in Calgary protesting against organizations that were trying to get people vaccinated. But, you know, he talks about, I got nothing against the LGBTQ. I have no beef with them. Except, again, it sure looks like he does. Science facts, Y or X chromosomes. There is nothing in between. Well, science would like to have a word with you, Mr. Moura, because you're absolutely wrong. But the caption to the photo is Y or X. There's nothing in between. Abnormal is the new normal. He's got a petition with Cinderella in a beard, and then she's also got some lingerie on, it appears, with, of course, a rainbow flag in the background. If you're a Muslim, you must sign this. Tell Disney to stop poisoning our kids' minds and souls. Keep your sexual identity to yourself. But he takes it a step farther. Because Mr. Moore apparently believes there's no such thing as LGBTQ2S plus Muslims. The faith in God and LGBTQ matters can't meet together. If you choose the first, you must lose the second, and vice versa. Now, again, if Mr. Moura was just a fringe nutter who preaches hate, he would be much easier to dismiss. But he's not. When you take a look at who Mr. Moura hangs out with, here he is campaigning with Mohammed Yassin with a Go Danielle poster. He's got pictures of himself and Brian Jean all over both of his profiles. And he campaigned in 2019 for current Justice Minister, Mickey Amory. Here he is in a picture with Jason Kenney. But of course, that's not the end of the Amory legacy now, is it? Because he also appeared in pictures with Mickey Amory and Danielle Smith very recently. But of course, we don't even have to go into his old social media to figure out that when Mr. Moura says it's just about let's keep the trans stuff away, that's just what he says when he's in front of the big microphone.
Actually, the union want to sexualize and indoctrinate our children's. So for every parent, I want to tell out there, for every member of this union who has kids, you need to be extra careful. Our battle now against these unions, and we need to put the stop for them, and I want to encourage every parent. The protest that happened September 20 is just a first step. We're not ending here. We're not stopping. So I just want to tell each and every one of you, when you go out there, for any mall, for any store, we're not just a keyboard pusher. We are the power. We are the people. So when you walk into that store and you don't belong to any union, to any service, just send a message. We are boycotting this because of your union, what it did to us. And if you see that multicolored flag, It's about time to hold that business responsible for what they are doing to our kids. Before we never called for that, but I know now it's something we need to call for, to boycott these businesses and hold them accountable. Let's see who's going to have a longer breath. Let's see who needs our businesses and our money.
So Mr. Mora makes it pretty clear. Unions, all of a sudden. Now, Mr. Mora is not just worried about the indoctrination of the kids. He wants people to fight against unions. He wants people to boycott any institution that uses a union, which will be fascinating if anyone ever needs health care. Mind you, health care is all infiltrated by the woke progressives, according to David Parker, so maybe they wouldn't avail themselves of that if they needed to. I would hope they would. He wants you to boycott any stores that have that multicolored flag. So all of a sudden, now it's not just about, oh, we got to fight back against the unions. We got to now punish any store that dares to voice support for the LGBTQ plus community by putting a pride flag in their store. And he wants people to not only boycott those stores, but apparently go into them and say, this is why I'm boycotting you. And as many people of social media have pointed out, that might not be an entirely bad thing, because if all the bigots don't go into the stores with the pride flags, maybe we just need to put up a bunch more pride flags. We'll have a bunch more places where we won't have to worry about this bullshit. But of course, the reality is they will still come in. They will still stamp their feet. They will still try to make noise. And God knows they'll absolutely film it all. This isn't about just protecting the kids. This is about an anti-LGBTQ2S plus agenda. This is about an anti-union agenda. This is about an anti-mainstream media agenda. And if you Google those things, you'll find yourself on that checklist that I talked about earlier pretty quick. And again, if it was just a small group of people, it wouldn't be nearly as much concern. But we also saw MLA Jason Steffen, who couldn't be bothered to show up to be sweared in at the legislature after he won in the election. But he could be bothered to show up for the Red Deer version of this march that took place on steps. I mean, you don't want to go too far. UCP MLA Jason Steffen, who also couldn't be bothered to pay his legal fees on time, or his lawyer registration fees to the Law Society on time. He couldn't be bothered to do that stuff. He showed up for this, though. He was his keynote speaker. And when people tried to say to the UCP caucus, hey, maybe that's a little offside, the UCP said, hey, you know what? He's just saying his thing. We believe in parental choice. But Jason Steffen wasn't alone there. At the exact same rally, guest appearance in Red Deer by Monique LaGrange. Monique LaGrange, of course, the person who got in a little bit of hot water there for a while when she posted a picture comparing kids holding pride flags to kids holding Nazi flags. Now, and this is fascinating because there's been some misunderstandings, some misinformation that's gone on around Miss LaGrange. She was fired from the provincial body that is a collection of school board trustees. So that provincial board of school board trustees, where there's one from every area, one from every Catholic school board, they said, yeah, she's not going to fit in here anymore after that. That's well below our standards. We're not going to tolerate that. She was fired from that role. She does, however, remain a Red Deer Catholic School Board trustee. The Red Deer Catholic School Board tried to say to Education Minister Demetrius Nicolaides, hey, please fire her. And then Demetrius Nicolaides said, you've got the authority to do that under the Education Act. Why don't you do it? And it turns out that they don't have a mechanism within their bylaws as to how to do that. So it's kind of like they've got the Lego all the pieces to build a Lego set, but they don't have the instruction manual to actually build the Lego set. They're missing that important little, here's how you do it ingredient. So she remains a Catholic school board trustee, and she attended this march. But that's not the only thing that she attended. And again, this is another place where, look, all of these things start to slowly come together. Take Back Alberta had an event this week. And when we take a look at who the guest speakers were, 3 of the names we just finished talking about. There's David Parker, disappointingly not in a turtleneck. There's Monique LaGrange. There's Mahmoud Mora again. But it's also important to realize that we're not just talking about the fringe of the fringe, because one of the other things that got traction on social media was a story, an Instagram story from Brock Harrison. Million March for Kids. Schools don't decide what parents know about their children. And I would agree with that statement. Schools don't decide what parents know about their children. The relationship that exists between parents and children decides what parents know about their children. How safe kids feel in that relationship decides what parents know about their children. Important distinction. Who's Brock Harrison? Some of you might not know. Well, other than looking like the answer perhaps to the question, what would somebody who grew up to be a milkman and a serial killer look like? Brock Harrison has actually been involved in politics for quite some time. Not only was he the communications guy for Andrew Scheer, who also is the answer to many milkman serial killer questions, some might say. He also worked in the UCP government with Jason Kenney. And then when he left office, he got himself a little bit of job with the TC Energy folks. And this is, again, where it's pretty wild that he would be comfortable posting this on social media given his higher profile. Because it turns out TC Energy actually has a whole rule about creating a culture of inclusion. One of the bullet points on their website, we launched 4 employee-led. Sorry. Little glitch. We launched 4 employee-led employee inclusion networks focused on 2S LGBTQIA plus women, Indigenous peoples, and veterans to encourage connection around shared values and identities and amplify underrepresented voices. So TC Energy, they want to create a culture of inclusion. It seems like Brock is maybe flying a little bit in the face of that, but I don't know. I'm no expert. And that's where we get to our next video clip. Because Danielle Smith in a press conference on Thursday, and we're going to talk about that press conference in just a sec, had this to say.
What did you think of a 1 million march?
Well, look, I mean, I'm sympathetic to parents who want to preserve the innocence of their kids for as long as they can. And that's part of the reason our school act allows for parents to have the choice to have their kids be exposed to topics of religion and sexuality at a pace that is their choice. That being said, we also know that sometimes these protests can get a little heated, and it's unfortunate if people take their opposition too far and cross the line. And there are mechanisms in law to make sure that that gets addressed if that's the case. But, I look at what young kids must be thinking as they're watching these battles go on in the streets. And that's what I'm concerned about, is I think every kid needs to feel safe and protected and needs to know that they're supported in their choices. So we're trying to find the right balance. We're trying to depoliticize it. But I respect the right of people when they have these really complex, difficult discussions to have, that they do it in a civil way, and I'm supportive of that.
And here's the problem with that. It's not that complex. It's really not. It's actually really quite simple. In Canada, we believe that you have the right to religion, you have the right to not religion. And when we're talking about a lot of these people who attended these protests, hate rallies, whatever you want to call them. I mean, Mr. Parker said it himself. The Muslims are with us. The Sikhs are with us. Might want to learn the pronunciation of that word if you're going to invoke it there, Davey. It's very clearly about religion. And you're allowed to believe whatever it is that you want to believe. If you want to believe that on Easter, Jesus Christ rose from the dead, that's cool. If you want to believe on Easter that a goldfish flops across your floor and leaves Lincoln Logs in your sock drawer, that's okay to believe too. The line that we agree to in this country is that you don't get to impose your beliefs on other people. And as I said earlier, the question as to whether or not there's such a thing as anything other than straight people who are non-binary, there's only cisgendered straight people in the world, that is demonstrably, scientifically, provably false. To hold any other position is to hold a position of belief, period. And you're allowed to believe that. If that's what you want to believe, that's cool. But you don't get to enforce that belief on anyone else. That's the price of admission in Canada. If you want to be a part of this society that allows you to practice your religion or your not religion, when in other countries of the world you would absolutely face persecution and in some cases imprisonment and in some cases death for practicing your faith or your not faith, you can do that here in Canada. But in order to do that, you have to accept the other rules, the base rules that we've agreed to in our Constitution and in our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And if you don't like that, if you refuse to accept those things that we as a nation have agreed upon, and it was no small doing getting to that point, a lot of drama getting there, you're welcome to move. That's the bottom line. And it's hard for people to hear because we're supposed to be an inclusive society. But being inclusive does not mean being inclusive of the rejection of our social contract. It does not mean being inclusive of the rejection of the agreed values. There are precious few things that we have managed to agree upon in this cultural mosaic that is Canada. There are precious few ideals and values that we have managed to agree upon. But those things need to be protected. And when people start to violate those things, they need to be called out. Because it is not Canadian, and it is not Albertan. And it is tragic that the premier of the province, who has historically in the past claimed to be an ally of a number of groups, not the least of which that's germane to this conversation, being the LGBTQ2S plus population. It's tragic that she couldn't say, we've got this thing called the Charter, folks. You're allowed to not like other people's beliefs, but you're not allowed to take those beliefs away. I would never say to David Parker or Mr. Mora, you shouldn't practice your faith. I would never say that. All I would say is you can't force your faith on other people. And in public institutions like the education system, you have no business trying to do that there. And that brings us to our other main event before we open it up for the open mic. Because Danielle Smith, she went ahead, she dropped her bomb. She said she was not going to do it, and then she did it anyways. We're talking about the pensions now. So, the pensions conversation, it's a big one. That was the press conference that we were talking about on Thursday. where Danielle Smith said, I know some words. I'll try to mash them together and see if maybe that gets me out of this taking a position, showing some leadership, heaven forbid, on this hate march. These people who are yelling these hateful things at their kids. It's really complicated because I went to one of their wedding. That whole press conference was to announce the release of a report that may have been written by an organization called Life Works. We'll get into that in a second. But she announced the report, and then she gave a glowing version of the report. Rather than let Smith play it, we're going to let one of the government manufactured and paid for advertisements explain Danielle Smith's position.
Alberta's government is exploring a new possibility, an Alberta Pension Plan, or APP for short. You might be wondering, what's in it for you? You see, in 2020, Alberta's government commissioned LifeWorks, an independent third-party consultant, to review the potential for an Alberta pension plan. Their analysis found many benefits for Albertans. That's because Alberta's young working population and more jobs with higher wages has resulted in Albertans over-contributing tens of billions into the CPP compared to the benefits we've received. This means that Albertans could save over $5 billion in just the first year if we moved from the CPP to an Alberta pension plan. These savings could increase each senior's monthly pension payment, or even provide a large bonus payment for seniors at retirement. Or these savings could be used to save Alberta workers up to $1,425 in payroll deductions every year. And if you're a business owner, small, medium, or large, an APP could reduce the premiums you pay each year by up to $1,425 per employee. Along with more money in your pocket, an APP would be more stable than the current CPP. An asset transfer of over $300 billion from the CPP to an APP would mean a more secure pension for Albertans. And agreements would be developed to allow Albertans to move throughout Canada without impacting their pension benefits. To be clear, there will be no move to an Alberta pension plan unless Albertans approve it in a referendum. It's your pension, your choice. So learn more and have your say at albertapensionplan.ca.
You just see the marketing folks that got together in the room and they're like, okay, we're going to completely disrupt not only the province, but the rest of the country. What's going to be the most appetizing way for us to do that? I know. Let's get a woman with a soft voice to say it and put some nice folksy acoustic guitar music, a little bit of electric guitar solo, but nothing overstated. Keep it clean. And then we'll spew out all of the claims that this report potentially could have made. I'm putting a lot of emphasis on the word could there, because if you go back and you listen to that train wreck, you'll hear very clearly the overuse of words like could or are or possibly. Speculative words, not truly based in reality or fact, because if we had actual reality or fact, then, we might run into some problems. We'll talk about some of those problems in a little bit. But one of the first things a lot of people said was, whoa, pump the brakes. This came up during the election. And you said, I swear I heard you say that you weren't gonna do anything about this. You didn't campaign on this. It was one of the first questions that came up at the press conference.
You're announcing a proposed Alberta provincial pension right now, but you did not campaign on one during the election. Why did you not campaign on the issue during the election?
I campaigned on releasing the report. We knew that we needed to get the updated numbers. The original report had been completed in 2021. With the passage of time, we had asked for an update. LifeMark told us they wouldn't be able to get it to us till May. I think we ultimately ended up getting it in June or July. And so it was a timing issue. But I made very clear anytime I was asked about it that I believed that this report needed to be released. Albertans needed to see the numbers for themselves. And if there was a decision at all to move forward on it, it would be done by referendum. I did campaign on that.
She did campaign on that. She says right there, you know what? I never said that we weren't going to do anything other than talk about the report. None of my MLAs or anybody said that this was a dead issue. I don't know why you would think that. And yet again, this is where I'd love to know how I send the Twitter account at Disordered YYC a fancy cup of coffee. because they showed up, whoever they are, they showed up with the receipts. And as much as Danielle Smith wants to say, oh, no, I said I would campaign. I campaigned on releasing the report. That's what I did. That's not what Smith or two of her MLAs had said.
I want to talk about the rest of Canada for a moment, who might see you with your Sovereignty Act, the prospect, the door still being open to pulling out of the Canada Pension Plan, and worry that a Smith government would be bad for national unity. Would those folks be wrong?
Look, no one is touching anybody's pension. Pension belongs to pensioners. It belongs to Albertans, and no one is going to be touching their pension. That's another example of the misinformation that the NDP keeps spreading because they don't want to talk about their record.
So this next question starts with RJ. Will you and your party commit to protecting pensions within the CPP and not forcing seniors to join an Alberta pension plan?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
This next question is directed for Chelsea. Diane Bell asks, if the UCP is elected, do they plan on replacing CPP with a provincial plan? Many of us seniors who rely on our CPP payments as part of our monthly income have concerns about the possible change and would like confirmation that this will not happen.
Thank you for the question. So no, that is not a topic of conversation anymore within the Conservative government.
It's not going to happen, said R.J. Sigurdsson, said the new MLA for Livingston McLeod. Not going to happen. No, it's not a thing. R.J. Sigurdsson, absolutely not. He will stand against any move to an Alberta provincial pension. Absolutely. Absolutely seems like one of those words that's kind of absolute. But let's just go back and listen to what Smith had to say when she was asked her question, because there's a little bit more, let's go with fleshing out, that needs to be done.
I want to talk about the rest of Canada for a moment, who might see you with your Sovereignty Act, the prospect, the door still being open to pulling out of the Canada Pension Plan, and worry that a Smith government would be bad for national unity. Would those folks be wrong?
Look, no one is touching anybody's pension. Pension belongs to pensioners. It belongs to Albertans, and no one is going to be touching their pension. That's another example of the misinformation that the NDP keeps spreading because they don't want to talk about their record.
To Canada, what would you say? Don't worry, Canada. Nobody's going to mess with your pension. Nobody's going to do anything like that. What did Smith have to say to Canada on Thursday?
I understand that there is the question for Albertans that we have to decide is it fair for our seniors and our workers and our employers to continue subsidizing the rest of Canada?
Oh, Canada, we're just so tired of subsidizing you. It's a really awkward lyric, but that's apparently what the Smith position is. All of a sudden now, she's gone from, no, don't worry about it, guys. We got it under control. Nobody's going to touch your pensions. It's not going to be any mess with the pensions, to, hey, we're tired of subsidizing you. Now, it's worth noting that the claims that the pension makes about how much money would be saved and what could be done with the money, we could give a big bonus payment to seniors. We could decrease the cost of the pension contributions. We could increase the amount that people get in pension contributions. We could figure out how to genetically engineer a unicorn. We could do that. There's lots of things we could do, but it's all predicated on one basic assumption. And that's what the amount is going to be. What's the amount that Alberta would be able to demand from the rest of Canada if we were to invoke this kind of thing? Should we worry about the details? Danielle Smith's answer is really quite something to behold.
But Premier, don't you need all of that locked down before you have a referendum to decide whether you're going to proceed with this? Because it feels like the fine print. You know, I'm thinking about my retirement, and the fine print really matters. Don't you need all of that fine print there for Albertans to see?
No, I think that because the amount of asset transfer is so significant, $334 billion, it amounts to about 28 times the amount of assets that you need to fund the liability that we have. Compared to right now, I think the CPP fund is about 8 times its the asset value. And so it would actually be more stable. It'd be a large enough fund that we'd be able to compete internationally with the largest sovereign wealth funds in the world to be able to get the best management.
Now, maybe it's me, but there's two things in that video that are really worth paying attention to. The first one is the claim that Alberta would be able to walk with $334 billion, which, as people have pointed out, is more than half of the current assets, the current value that exists in the Canada Pension Plan. The notion that Alberta, would just be able to say, hey, rest of Canada, we're taking more than half of the money that the entire country has saved up. Hope you're cool with that, and get away with it, is laughable for a couple of different reasons. First of all, it's very, very clear in the legislation, as much as Danielle Smith likes to say, you know what, there's a pathway. What she doesn't include is that pathway in the legislation. It's very clearly stated that in order for any amendments to be made to either the Pension Act or the other affiliated act, any amendments, any changes, those amendments have to be agreed upon by 2/3 of the provinces of Canada, representing 2/3 of the population of Canada. So you can't just get all the really small provinces together to say, hey, we'll let you walk with over half of the money in the bank. You have to have 2/3 of the population of Canada represented as well. And the odds of getting 2/3 of the population of Canada to let Alberta walk with half of the money that's saved up for pensioners are pretty slim. Extraordinarily slim. Non-existent even. So the reality as to how this whole thing would unfold is extraordinarily up for question. Because there are legal challenges, and the interpretation that this report's authors have provided has been heavily criticized by experts, legal scholars, seniors, advocacy groups, economists. Trevor Tombe wrote a whole paper on how inaccurate it seemed Danielle Smith's claims were. But if we really want to know how much Alberta should be able to walk away with, let's assume for a second that there was somebody who maybe just a couple of years ago maybe had weighed in on this issue, and maybe they brought to the table a number that we could maybe refer to have an idea of how out of touch is the claim of $334 billion. If only we could ask that person.
I personally look at this as the first step towards an Alberta pension plan. He's trying to get the expertise and the money aside so that when he makes the pitch for the $40 billion transfer from the Canada Pension.
What's that, Danielle? $40 billion? Well, that seems like $300 billion shy of what you were talking about just a moment ago. That video was from very early on in Jason Kenney's tenure when he announced the Fair Deal panel, and Danielle Smith was acting as an analyst, as a pundit. And in fact, at the same time, the UCP put out that $40 million number as well. But now somehow, a short 4 years later, Alberta apparently invested another $300 billion, a third of $1 trillion into the pension plan, and we'd like our money back now. But that's not even the most disturbing part of the clip. I'm going to play the clip again because there's something that is really wild that's going on here.
But Premier, don't you need all of that locked down before you have a referendum to decide whether you're going to proceed with this? Because it feels like the fine print. You know, I'm thinking about my retirement, and the fine print really matters. Don't you need all of that fine print there for Albertans to see?
No, I think that because the amount of asset transfer is so significant, $334 billion, it amounts to about 28 times the amount of assets that you need to fund the liability that we have. Compared to right now, I think the CPP fund is about 8 times its the asset value. And so it would actually be more stable. It'd be a large enough fund that we'd be able to compete internationally with the largest sovereign wealth funds in the world to be able to get the best management.
That's Danielle Smith making the argument that the details don't matter because of the amount of money that's involved. We've got some wiggle room here, is effectively the argument that she's making. When she's asking Albertans to trust her judgment, to trust her ability to manage all of the details, to make sure that however this fund was to be set up, all of the things that could potentially screw over a senior's retirement would be taken care of. And her response is not, we're going to get those details figured out and then we'll have the referendum. Her response is, we're going to walk with so much money, it doesn't even matter. Which is absolutely wild, especially when you consider multiple times this week, Danielle Smith couldn't even get the authors of the report right.
In 2020, Alberta's government commissioned LifeWorks, an independent third-party expert consultant. We hired LifeMark, which incidentally was formerly Morneau Chappelle. With the passage of time, we had asked for an update. LifeMark told us they wouldn't be able to get it to us till May.
We did get an estimate from LifeMark about what it would cost.
To be clear, the report is from LifeWork. It's not LifeMark. One would think if you were trying to pitch to Albertans, and by extension, the rest of Canada to let it happen, that you should be trusted with the details of managing anywhere between $40 billion to $334 billion, I guess, that you would be able to at least manage getting the name of the people who told you it was possible right. But even that, on multiple occasions, because that audio that you heard is not just Danielle Smith at the press conference, it's also her appearing on national television, getting the name wrong. It's not a super compelling argument. Hey, you should totally trust us with all of this money because we can't remember the names of the people who told us that we were going to be able to get this much money in the first place. And that brings us to the last little bit, last two bits that we got to talk about. We're going to do the survey first. So the first thing is, one of the things that the provincial government, again, the provincial government funded by taxpayers. So you're paying for all of this. If you're listening to the province of Alberta and you pay taxes of any kind, you're paying for these ads. You're paying for this survey. The province released a survey. Hey, we got a bunch of questions we're going to ask you about the things and the stuff and what you think about the pension. And you would think, given that the core of this conversation is, should Alberta move out of the Canadian pension plan, or should we go our own road with an indeterminate amount of money and maybe a company LifeWork, who knows? It doesn't really matter, does it? You'd think that would be the main question. Do you think we should do this very big thing? But in fact, the whole survey is predicated on the assumption, hey, we're going to do this thing. There's a boatload of questions. And you're absolutely right. It's a complete mess. We made the graphic this way on purpose because every single question is, how would you like to see this money used? How do you think the money should be used? What of these things is the most important for you? Do you think we should give the seniors the more money, or should we decrease the premiums, or should we maybe do both? What should we do? Nowhere in there is the question, should we do it? There's a couple of text boxes that are available where you can say, please don't do this. But those text boxes, except for the final one, are responses to questions of, what do you think the priority of these things should be? So as much as we're seeing people who are filling out the survey and using all of the text boxes to say, oh, I think this might be some bullshit right here. I don't want you to leave the CPP. I don't want to leave the CPP. The only one that they couldn't arguably invalidate, because it wasn't an answer to the question that they asked, is the last one, where they ask, do you have any final thoughts to share with the panel regarding an Alberta pension plan? All of the other answer boxes You can fill in answers and you can hope that somebody reads them. But as we've seen with similar surveys from the UCP government, if they get an answer to a question that is not relevant to the question that was asked, they will consider it an invalid answer and dismiss it. Which really means the only available way to make your voice heard on this issue is to either write your MLA and probably CC in the other party. If you're in a UCP constituency, write your UCP MLA and CC the critic on the NDP side and vice versa. Or show up at one of the town halls to be announced and make your voice heard there. Because this survey is an exercise in predetermined outcomes. And as we've seen from the UCP over and over and over again, when they have a predetermined outcome in mind, cough, closing the Lethbridge supervised consumption site, cough, they will go to any length to do that. But there's one other thing we got to touch on real quick. There's been a bunch of people on the social medias. Social media is always right. Especially when it comes to pundits. Oh, pundits get it right all the time. There's been a lot of people talking about, oh, hey, Danielle Smith, she's basically said between the survey where there's all these predetermined outcomes, and then we've got the press conference, it seems like there's pretty much guaranteed going to be a referendum. Now, for anybody who's curious, that referendum, a couple of UCP MLAs have already alluded, would be going on during the municipal elections in 2025, just to make things that much more contentious. They'll include the referendum question in the municipal elections, in all likelihood, if it comes to a referendum, which it probably will. But to be clear, they have not announced that there's going to be a referendum. What the UCP have said, what the government has said, is that we're doing a consultation period to determine if there's going to be a referendum. And that enables them to spend all of your money on advertising. But there's a few people have chucked around this picture on social media, and they've said, hey, I don't know. It seems like, if you take a look at the referendum question, during the referendum period, a department or provincial corporation shall not advertise or publish any information about its programs or activities related to the subject matter of the referendum that has a disproportionate impact on voters in the areas of Alberta in which the referendum is being held, unless the advertisement or publication, then it gives some there's some legitimate excuses for why the government might have to advertise. But the spirit of it is, hey, government, if you're going to hold a referendum, you can't advertise. You can't use taxpayers' money to influence the outcome. And as we very clearly saw in that one advertisement, of which there are many already, if anybody is curious, you can go over to Your Government of Alberta Facebook page and take a look at the many advertising programs that they're currently running, paying for with your dollars. And those are just the ones they're running on Facebook. That's not including the print. That's not including the radio. That's not including the television. That's not included the YouTubes and all of that. It's not including any of those things. A lot of money being spent. It would be nice to think, oh, we can catch the government. Oh, they're doing a thing. They're spending our money during a referendum period. But as a good friend of the show, Mr. Miles Chikirda, pointed out, you got to take a look on what the definitions of the terms are. Sometimes it's good to have a pedant kicking around. Referendum period. In the case of a referendum under the Referendum Act, ordered to be held in conjunction with the general election under this act, or as a standalone referendum on a date provided in the order, the period commencing when the order is issued and ending at the end of the date set for voting, and in the case of a referendum under the Referendum Act to be held in conjunction with the general election under the Local Authorities Act, the period commencing on the later of the date of which the order is issued or 60 days before the election day and ending at the end of election day. So until Danielle Smith and UCP say, hey, you know what? We listen, maybe, and we've decided that we're definitely going to have a referendum and we're issuing the order on this day, until they do that, we're not in the referendum period, which means they can spend as much of your taxpayer dollars as they want to convince you and your friends and your neighbors that, gosh, we could do all of these amazing things with this fictional amount of money that has been debunked by almost everybody except for Daniel Smith and the UCP. They really like that $334 billion. It's a big number. It's so big, you don't even have to worry about the details. Who couldn't love that? They can just keep spending and spending and spending. By the way, the most likely time, like we said, 2025, you've got like a year and a half of sitting through advertising for why the Alberta pension plan would be the best thing ever. They're going to absolutely flood the zone with advertising on this issue. This is going to be such a huge strategic part of how the fight with Ottawa, those Eastern bastards, how that's going to be framed. Now's the part where I do the plugs. So here's the shameless plugs part of the show. You may have noticed it's getting colder outside. That's my advertising voice right there, because I'm going to try to show you some of our new product lines. We just got these. I got the email about these today. With the weather turning, so is our merch line. I'm so bad at this. We got hoodies and we got toques. I'm excited for the toques. I'm actually going to order me one because I have a weakness for hats, as anybody who's watched the show for any length of time is probably fully aware. But we got official breakdown hoodies. We got official breakdown toques, and that goes in line with all of the other merch that we have. We have a couple of other hoodies. We have the mugs, which are my personal favorite. I just really love the mugs. I literally have coffee out of mine almost every morning. So all of this is available on the website abpoly.ca. You can also get there's a lot to unpack here, t-shirts, as well as the Keep the Conversation Going t-shirts. And I hear good things. I know a couple of folks have ordered them. They've said that they're quite happy with it. Again, I will plug the mugs ad infinitum. And that's, I think, it for the evening. This is going to be a two-parter. I'm going to break this up into two parts because this is coming on to 3 hours, and that's a lot to ask out of anyone. I want to say a big thank you to everybody who has hung on this long for the live presentation of this show, whether or not you've been in the chats on the YouTubes and the Facebooks. I noticed that the Facebooks got a lot quieter after we did a little bit of pruning on some of the folks that were coming in and saying some things. So that's kind of nice. But it's good to see all the regulars in there. Thank you so much for coming in, sharing your thoughts. And I love the networking that's going on in there. That's super fantastic. I want to say a big thank you to everybody who's hung out on the Twitter Spaces or the X Spaces as well. And anybody who's listening to the podcast version, the audio version on your favorite podcasting platform, leave us a little review. They help. If you're watching on the YouTubes, like and subscribe, smash that subscribe button, as the kids say. And as always, if you're looking for a way to get access to our interview episodes, you can do that by signing up to be one of our Patreon sponsors at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab, where we post all of our interview episodes early. And we have a couple coming up again. We kind of took a little bit of break for a couple of weeks because there's a lot going on. But we have a couple more coming up that we're excited to be releasing. Those will be available in the next couple of weeks or two. And we are still just putting the finishing touches on our breakthrough interview with one of the top brass for Take Back Alberta. It's going to be a spicy one, I promise. It's going to be so good. We're just getting the last little figures in place to make it work. So you can watch for that as well, coming out soon. I want to say a big thank you to everybody who weighed in tonight and everybody who's listening. And as always, there's a lot going on. It was a nutty week. There's lots of indication it's just going to continue on that route for the next little bit up until the legislature resumes at the end of October. So make sure you're taking time to take care of yourself. Make sure you're giving yourself a break. Find something that you enjoy doing, even if it's just, playing Minecraft or something. It's a fun little game. I hear people YouTube about it. I'm not sure, though. But take care of yourselves. And as always, keep the conversation going. Thank you.